Hi, my name is Billy Midget. You know, it seems like everywhere we turn these days, the hot topic of conversation is the government. The government's too big, the government's too small. It needs to do more for the people, it needs to leave the people alone and let them do for themselves. Lots of opinions, lots of debate, and that's a good thing, because our country thrives on a good, educated debate. So with the educated part in mind, I'd like to talk to you today about our founding fathers, the system of government they created, and how it applies to us today, specifically when it comes to the federal deficit spending, and the growth of government. Now, in the late 1700s, our country had just been formed, and it was similar to what we have today in the fact that there were basically two political parties back there kind of running the show. Back then, it was the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists were led by George Washington, John Adams, and Alexander Hamilton. Now, they believed we should have a small, centralized government, but it should be the hub. Everything should kind of go through there. They felt we should have a national bank, and that the federal government should assume all of the debt incurred by the states during the Revolutionary War. Now, the Anti-Federalists were led by Thomas Jefferson, and they felt that we should also have a small centralized government, but they didn't agree with some of the other things. They felt the majority of the power belonged to the states and the individuals. They disagreed with having a national bank, and they were strongly opposed to a federal deficit. Jefferson was even quoted as saying, "National indebtedness burdens the living with the extravagances of the dead." James Madison said simply, "A public debt is a public curse." But Alexander Hamilton was a banker and an economist, and he felt that by assuming that debt, it would stimulate the economy. Now, this was something that Jefferson and the Anti-Federalists could get on board with, so they reluctantly agreed. And Hamilton was right. By assuming that debt, our economy came out of the gates very strong. Unfortunately, this meant the federal government started out with a deficit. However, by implementing a single-payer system in the House and the Senate, they were able to quickly balance the budget and maintain that balanced budget for the next 85 or 90 years, except for times of war and recession. Then in 1885, the House decided to strip the Appropriation Committee of much of its spending authority. Now, this proved to be not a very good idea, because after a long time of consistently balanced budgets, we suddenly had record peacetime deficits, sometimes almost 3 times the gross national product. By 1919, the Senate had seen enough, and they reinstituted the single-payer system. In 1921, the House followed suit, and we were back in line with consistently balanced budgets. Unfortunately, it didn't last very long, because in 1930, we were struck by the Great Depression. In 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, was elected president. And FDR's solution for getting us out of the Great Depression was government intervention. Many new programs, many new committees, many more hands in the kitty trying to spend the government dollar. This ushered in the era of big government and government growth. And the government continued to grow gradually for the next 30 years or so. And then in 1965, in the mid-60s, Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, was president. And he had his vision of a great society. And the great society was government helping those less fortunate. Once again, more entitlement programs, more entitlement committees, more entitlement spending. By the mid-1970s, entitlement spending had hit high gear. Now, the effect this has had on us is we've got generation after generation of politician who thinks that deficit spending is just standard operating procedure, it's the way we do business. Proof of this is since 1950, only 7 times have we had a balanced budget. And that's directly attributed to the growth of government. Now let's take a look at the breakdown. Prior to 1930, the Appropriations Committee was responsible for 90% of government expenditures. Today, the Appropriations Committee is responsible for just 40%. 7 other committees are responsible for 55% of the government spending. Now you may say, well, of course the government's grown. It had to grow, the country grew. It can't be the same as it was in 17 or 1800s. And technically that's true, but we're not talking about the number of representatives in Congress. We're talking about government scope, how far it reaches into our lives every day into places it never reached before. Now whether that's good or bad, that's a matter for debate. But the fact of the matter is, the growth of government has changed the way Congress does business, and it's a far cry from what our founding fathers implemented 220 plus years ago. And that is not debatable. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, and why did the government strip the Appropriations Committee of this spending authority and spread it out to other committees in 1885?
Well, many felt that the Appropriations Committee was becoming too powerful. It said whoever controls the money kind of controls everything, and that's what was happening. The Appropriations Committee was becoming too powerful, and they wanted to kind of spread that out.
Okay, so why don't we simply go back to the single-payer system in both the House and the Senate?
Well, that's a good idea. The problem is the government is so big, it's grown so much that it's pretty tough for one committee to be able to handle that. And we know congressmen aren't used to working that hard anyway, so it's hard for them to be able to come up and get together and do that, especially now too, with our two-party system, the Democrats and Republicans, they don't trust each other very much. So whichever party was in charge probably wouldn't be trusting the other party with all of the money.
Okay.
So,
Well, is it possible to balance the budget and control the spending without returning to the old system?
no, absolutely. In the mid-1990s, I think 1997, President Clinton had a balanced budget. Now, he stepped in at a perfect time because we had a recent recession, a slight recession in 1991, and the Gulf War ended in the early 1990s as well. So we had time to rebuild things, and we got to a point where we were in good shape and we were able to balance the budget. The problem becomes whenever we hit a recession or a war, the government and the legislature usually isn't patient enough to let the system take care of itself. They want to throw a new program in to try to fix things, and it usually just perpetuates the problem. Thank you.